All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going deep on a concept called the severing.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is, but also I think really powerful and thought-provoking.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the severing all about?
Well, we're pulling from a podcast episode description, and it features a shaman in journey.
A shaman and journey.
Yeah, and the other person identifies as a wounded mother in awakening, so already we're in for something interesting.
Definitely some unique perspectives there.
Right, and they use this term, the severing, to talk about letting go, not just like your typical, decluttering or whatever.
Right.
We're talking about letting go of relationships, beliefs, even parts of yourself that aren't serving you anymore.
Oh, wow. That's deep. So it's like a major life overhaul.
Kinda, yeah. But it's not just about like cutting things off on a surface level. They dig deeper.
Deeper how?
Well, they describe it as unbinding energy.
Unbinding energy. What does that even mean?
That's what we're going to unpack. It suggests a much deeper process, maybe even spiritual.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is a deep dive.
Right. And what's really cool is they each come at this from totally different angles. One's drawn to like dissolving boundaries, and the other is all about structure and discipline.
Huh. That's interesting. So their personalities almost make the concept even richer.
Exactly. But before we dive into that, how would you explain unbinding energy to someone who's like never heard of this before?
Let me think. Okay, imagine when you form like a really deep connection with someone or even an idea. There's this exchange of energy happening, like an invisible thread linking you.
I can see that.
So the severing, it's not just about breaking that thread. It's like untangling the energy so you're not still carrying around those remnants.
Ooh, I like that analogy. So it's not just about ending the connection, it's about clearing the energetic residue. Makes sense.
Right.
But that sounds like it could get kind of messy and painful, no?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And from what I've read, they don't shy away from that at all, especially the wounded mother. A lot of raw emotion there, like feeling abandoned, questioning if she was holding on to something that had already let go.
Oof, yeah. That hits close to home for a lot of people, I think, that fear of abandonment.
Totally. And it makes sense given her personality type.
Yeah.
She's an INFP.
INFP. Remind me what that stands for.
It's introverted, intuitive, feeling, perceiving. Basically, INFPs tend to be deeply empathetic and sensitive. So those feelings of loss hit them extra hard.
Gotcha. And, speaking of letting go, they actually talk about severing ties with Christianity in one of the sources. Made me think, most of us probably haven't ditched an entire religion,
Right.
but we've all had to let go of beliefs that just don't fit anymore, right?
Right.
Maybe it's some childhood notion or a limiting belief about ourselves.
Yeah.
Why is that so hard to do, you think, even when we know it's for the best?
Well, familiarity is comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And beliefs, especially the ones we've held for a long time, they can feel like part of our identity.
Like letting go feels like losing a piece of ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Even if it's ultimately a good thing.
And then there's the whole fear of the unknown thing. Like, if I let go of this belief, what takes its place? Will I feel lost?
Totally. Will people judge me? All valid fears.
Oh, yeah.
But what's fascinating about the shaman and the wounded mother is they acknowledge that pain, that fear. But they also see the severing as this path to balance, to stability.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
No, definitely not. It's an ending, sure. But it's also a beginning, like closing one chapter to open a new one.
I like that. And they even use this powerful analogy talking about, like, the Israelites returning to Egypt after escaping slavery.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
So tempting to go back to what's familiar, even if it wasn't good for us.
totally. It's like our brains are wired for comfort, even if that means avoiding pain that could lead to growth.
Exactly. Haven't we all done that at some point?
Oh, absolutely. I know I have. Whether it's a bad habit or, going back to a relationship that just wasn't good for me.
That pull is strong, but it takes courage to resist it.
It does, and self-awareness, which these two seem to have in spades.
They do. And another thing that struck me is how their different astrological signs color their perspectives. The shaman's a Pisces, all about dissolving boundaries, going with the flow. And the wounded mother is a Capricorn. So structure, discipline, very different approaches.
That's got to make for some interesting conversations.
Right. How do those two even approach the severing together?
Well, I imagine the shaman sees it as like this natural, organic process.
Right.
And the wounded mother might be more cautious, intentional about it, like planning each step. but they both recognize it's necessary.
I wonder if those contrasting approaches actually help them grow together. Like they challenge each other to see things differently.
Totally. They can learn from each other, right?
Yeah.
Find that balance between those extremes.
It's like even as we sever ties, new connections can emerge. I love that.
Yeah.
And speaking of growth, one thing they were really honest about, which I appreciated, is their own struggles. Like, they admit to sometimes seeking out physical stimulations to avoid the pain of the severing.
Physical stimulation.
Yeah, like drinking, distractions, anything to kind of numb themselves.
Oh, yeah. I get that. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Wanting to avoid those uncomfortable emotions.
Right. But how do we get more comfortable with that discomfort? Because that's where growth happens, right?
Well, I think it starts with being honest with ourselves, recognizing what we're avoiding and why.
So self-awareness again, big theme here.
It is. And then, finding healthier ways to cope. Could be therapy, journaling, even just allowing ourselves to feel those tough emotions instead of pushing them away.
Because ultimately, growth requires us to face those uncomfortable truths. And the shaman and the wounded mother don't sugarcoat that. They flat out say, we can't control others, we can't heal them.
Oof. That's a hard one to swallow.
It is. But it's also incredibly freeing once you accept it.
It is freeing. It means letting go of the illusion that we can fix people. And it forces us to take responsibility for our own well-being, which I think brings us back to boundaries, something they talk about a lot.
They do, and they make it clear that setting boundaries is not easy.
Nope, especially when the people we love are the ones pushing those boundaries. It's not just about saying no, it's about holding firm.
Which takes serious courage, especially for someone like the wounded mother who might struggle with those feelings of abandonment.
Oh, absolutely. But it's important to remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's self-preservation, recognizing that our needs are just as important as anyone else's. And speaking of needs, they also talk about the challenge of authenticity, especially in relationships. How much of ourselves do we reveal? How do we deal with those differences in beliefs and values?
Right. It's a constant dance. And they talk about decolonizing themselves from societal expectations, which I found fascinating. Like, what's the right way to be a partner or a parent? And how do we break free from those scripts that just don't serve us anymore?
I love that they're challenging those norms. I think it starts with questioning those scripts. Like, where did this belief even come from? Does it still align with who I am and what I want?
And then having those tough conversations, right, with the people in our lives. It can be scary to rock the boat, but sometimes it's necessary for that genuine connection.
And sometimes that authentic connection requires letting go of the people and beliefs that are holding us back, which brings us right back to the severing, full circle.
It all connects. It's recognizing when a chapter needs to end, even if it hurts, and then making space for something new and true to come in.
And trusting that even though it might be messy and unpredictable, that process will ultimately lead to a more authentic, fulfilling life. It's like by letting go of all that stuff that's not working, we can get a better sense of who we are, right?
Yeah, and that's where that feeling of freedom comes in that they talk about,
Yeah.
When we're not holding on to all those old beliefs and those bad relationships, we can explore different parts of ourselves. It's like we're shedding a skin that doesn't fit anymore and a new version can emerge.
I love that analogy.
So it's not just about loss, it's about gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves and what really matters.
Exactly.
Mm.
And they talk about how that process can be exciting, but also really tough. They even mentioned feeling exhausted during the severing, especially when it came to setting boundaries with people.
Yeah, because setting those boundaries can be so hard, especially when you're dealing with people who aren't used to it. They might push back or try to make you feel guilty, and that's draining.
Oh, totally. It can be easy to slip back into old patterns, like giving in to the temptation to go back to what's familiar, even if it's not healthy.
Right. It's like our brains are wired to choose the easy path, even if it means missing out on growth.
Exactly. And they're honest about the fact that they struggled with that too.
Yeah.
They talk about fighting those urges and questioning themselves. It wasn't always easy.
Which makes their journey so relatable. It's not like they have it all figured out. They're in the thick of it just like the rest of us.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes their message so powerful.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to be real about the ups and downs, the messiness of it all.
So for those of us who are feeling overwhelmed by this whole idea of the severing, where do we even start? What advice do they offer?
Well, they really emphasize being kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
okay to feel all those complicated emotions, to grieve what you're letting go of. They also talk about finding support, whether it's through therapy or community, or just connecting with people who get it.
So we don't have to go through this alone.
Definitely not. And they also talk about trusting your gut. you know? Listening to that inner voice that's guiding you towards what's right, even if it means making tough choices.
Like ending relationships or letting go of beliefs that no longer serve you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even when it's hard. And they remind us that the severing isn't a one-time thing. It's something we might need to revisit over and over throughout our lives as we grow and change.
So it's about being willing to let go again and again, trusting that each time we do it creates space for something even better.
And it's about honoring the process, accepting that the discomfort is a natural part of growth.
It's like the severing is a metaphor for life in general. We're always letting go of old versions of ourselves, old relationships, old ways of thinking to make room for new experiences.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It reminds us that change is inevitable and that embracing it even when it's hard is essential to living a full and authentic life.
Speaking of authenticity, they also talk about how the severing can actually help us be more authentic in our other relationships.
Yeah, because when we're clear about our own boundaries and values, we can communicate them more effectively and build relationships that are based on mutual respect.
And that takes courage, right? To be vulnerable, to speak your truth, even if it means risking rejection.
Oh, absolutely. But it's also incredibly freeing. When you let go of the need to please everyone and just be yourself, that authenticity can be magnetic. It attracts people who appreciate you for who you really are.
So in a way, the severing can help us create a more authentic life, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's about creating a life that's true to you, your values, your passions. And that's a beautiful thing.
It really is. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember about the severing?
I think the most important thing is to remember that it's not about punishment. It's not about hurting ourselves or others. It's about creating space for growth for everyone involved. And while it can be painful, it's also incredibly empowering because it allows us to step into our own power to create a life that's truly our own and to cultivate relationships that are based on authenticity and respect.
That's beautifully said. The severing, it's not just something to think about with your head. It's something we got to feel and process on a deeper level, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's about tapping into that inner knowing and figuring out what it means for you personally in this moment.
Exactly. And that leads us to our final thought-provoking question, inspired by our sources, of course. If we accept that we can't change others, what responsibility do we have to ourselves in those relationships? Is severing ties always the answer?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There are no easy answers. It's such a personal journey. And deciding to cut ties with someone is never something to take lightly. Sometimes the severing might look like creating distance, or setting really strong boundaries, or even walking away from the relationship completely.
Right. It's not always black and white.
Exactly. And other times it might mean changing our own expectations, like letting go of the need to control or fix the other person and finding ways to coexist peacefully without sacrificing our own well-being.
So it's not always about ending all contact. It's about figuring out what that relationship needs to look like so that both people feel respected and their needs are met.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness comes in. We need to be honest with ourselves about what we're willing to put up with. What are our deal breakers? What do we need to feel safe and respected?
And it's okay if those needs and boundaries change over time, right? What worked for us in the past might not work anymore, and that's totally fine.
It is. And that's where the courage comes in. It takes guts to communicate those changing needs, to have those hard conversations, and to stand our ground even when it's tough.
That's such a powerful reminder for all of us. So as we wrap up this deep dive on the severing, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Letting go can be such a powerful act of self-love.
It really can.
It's about honoring our own needs, trusting our gut, and creating space for growth, both for ourselves and the people we care about.
So well said.
Oh.
And remember, everyone, this journey of the severing, it's a personal one. There's no right or wrong way to do it.
Exactly.
The most important thing is to listen to your heart, trust your instincts, and make choices that feel true to you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the journey of becoming your most authentic self.